The artist of these works, Kevin Gilbert, says about his art, quote, "Culture has to be developed from the heart, from the depths of human integrity, the depths of human passion, the depths of human creativity, and I believe that if there is ever to be a sound overall culture for this land, it has to involve everyone, and it must involve everyone, and it must evolve or be based upon those fine aspects of the human family: integrity, justice, vision, creativity, life, honor." And Gilbert is a Wiradjuri artist. The Janbi Desert Weaver said about this piece, quote, "We like working with the grasses that grow on our land. The land inspires us to make things," end quote. The next Aboriginal artist, Fiona Hall, collected driftwood to make this piece.
Often looked over when it comes to lands that were colonially taken over, such as Australia and the United States of America, is the fact that no matter where you are, at any point, the land you are standing on belonged to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Looking at Australia's history with the Indigenous peoples alone, the invasion of Australia cut the Indigenous population from over 1 million to a mere 30,000. The land was declared vacant by the British, Indigenous peoples were moved onto reserves and missions, and wide-scale massacre and disease ravaged the communities. On missions, Aboriginal peoples were not allowed to transmit their culture, and the forced resettlement between nations created tensions and barriers between nations that never existed before, as well as went against their protocols they lived for by thousands of years. Resilient today, Aboriginal cultures are fighting back against misconceptions, racism, and negative attitudes, all created by colonial presence as justification for colonial action. Furthermore, the general public of Australia is also working to understand Aboriginal Australia as it is alive today and not a mere thing of the past. Understanding their worldview is extremely important to that. Quote, "Indigenous knowledges have informed ways of being, and thus well-being, since before the time of colonization, when subsequently demeaned and devalued. As well as informing about appropriate ways of living with country and other people, Aboriginal knowledges stand in particular relationship of critical dialogue with introduced knowledges, sometimes oppressive, thus providing an important position from which to develop new ways forward." Quote. Welcome to Country is at the heart of understanding and respecting Aboriginal cultures and life. Welcome to Country must be performed by an Aboriginal person of that country, and it is the process of acknowledging that you are on their land and respecting their traditions. Part of their law is the process of being invited onto the land. When an Aboriginal person of that country is not present, instead an acknowledgement of country is performed by any other person not from the country to yet again show respect for the land and traditions of those people. For example, an acknowledgement of country for the Kaurna people is, "We acknowledge the Kaurna people, the traditional owners of the lands and waters where the city of Adelaide has been built." Kinship alone is not a single concept, but rather has multiple levels: moiety, totem, and skin names. Moiety is the belief that everything in the world is split in half, with one being the mirror image of the other, and the universe is only whole when both halves come together. This embodies the balance of use and protection of nature. Totems are four-part symbols which have a symbol for your nation, clan, family group, and personal totem. These symbols link a person to the universe and give them a responsibility to protect and use the world around them, and then pass those ideals down. 3 of these totems are predestined, but the personal totem is assigned at any point in time by elders of the nation. The last level of kinship is skin name, which indicates a personal bloodline and how generations are interconnected. Thus, the process of kingship and law creates a system of reciprocal support, not based on blood purely, where no one is ever an only child, no one is ever familyless, and no one ever has no place to go. For example, if there is shared moiety and totem between 2 individuals, they are considered family regardless of bloodline. Furthermore, shared kinship across nations created the need for multilingualism and links through nature of resources, trade, and marriage. Indigenous law is also not what is traditionally associated with law in the Western mindset. For law in Indigenous Australia is more of a code of interaction between humans and between humans and the earth. Indigenous law emphasizes the autonomy of individuals and groups as well as the attending of business. According to law, individuals only attend to their business and do not concern themselves with others' business. Negotiation is carried out in relation to dreaming and intermarriage. Personal and group interactions rely on respect for creation and the passing down of responsibility for others and the land. In essence, autonomy and respect creates harmony and peace. Understanding the Indigenous worldview is particularly tricky because by translating it into English alone, Western concepts are being imposed and some things merely cannot translate into that framework. As outlined by Vicki Greaves, quote, Indigenous spirituality derives from a philosophy that establishes the holistic notion of the interconnectedness of the elements of the earth and the universe, animate and inanimate, whereby people, the plants and animals, landforms, and celestial bodies are interrelated. How this interconnectedness exists and why it is important to keep all things in healthy interdependence is expressed and encoded in sacred stories or myths. These creation stories describe the shaping and developing of the world as people know and experience it through the activities of powerful creator ancestors. These ancestors created order out of chaos, form out of formlessness, life out of lifelessness, and as they did so, they established the ways in which all things should live so as to maintain order and stability. The creation ancestors thus laid down not only the foundations of all life, but also what people had to do to maintain their part of this interconnectedness, the law. The law ensures that each person knows his or her relationships and responsibilities for other people, their kin, for country, including water sources, landforms, and species, and for their ongoing relationships with the ancestor spirits themselves. Thus, Indigenous connectivity to land, dreaming, which encompasses creation and visions about the world, kinship, and law are all interconnected and interdependent.
Dreams, dreaming, and dream time are central to Aboriginal beliefs and spirituality and how to talk about them. Often, the dream time is considered creation when ancestors came into being and the setup of life for Aboriginal people. For others, dreaming represents a past, current, and future reality. Aboriginal people believe that every person exists in dreaming and that this person existed before they were born and will continue to exist after they die. In a general sense, the dreaming is a personification of the Aboriginal culture, including songs, stories, and oral traditions, dancing, art, and ceremonial practices, law and tradition, magical practices, and religion, and a complicated social structure. However, it is important to keep in mind that dreams, dreaming, and dream time are often different nation to nation, person to person. It is an extremely personal as well as group mindset.
What have been the ways that you, as a study abroad student, have interacted with Indigenous culture and history since being in Australia?
Honestly, not that much. Probably less so than I thought I would. I'm not taking any courses on Indigenous cultures or anything like that. During our pre-orientation program, we went to a museum in Melbourne where we talked about some Indigenous art.
What have you noticed are major differences between the ways that cultures today interact with the environment as compared to the way Indigenous populations interacted with nature?
Well, I don't know much about the specifics of Indigenous cultures and how they interact with the environment. I certainly assume that they had a closer relationship to it than we do today. We're obviously pretty reliant on technology, whether that be cell phones or just light bulbs. And I remember from our Royal National Park trip, Wayne showed us that they use these pine cone things as a source of light. And there's definitely a different dynamic when you're actually reliant on nature and you call it home as opposed to just using it as some sort of tourism spectacle, you know? So I think it's important to try to consider your relationship with nature when you're outdoor exploring.
What have been the ways that you, as a tourist in Australia, have interacted with Indigenous history and culture?
Well, I've only been here a couple days, but this morning I saw some Indigenous performers at Circular Quay, and then later today I went to an art museum and saw a lot of Indigenous work.